The group of Ukraine's allies, led by the French President Emmanuel Macron and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, is meeting in Paris to discuss a post-war plan for Ukraine. The leaders, dubbed the Coalition of the Willing, are reported to be discussing the idea of European troops being part of a plan to safeguard a truce to end Russia's war in Ukraine.
Russia's war in Ukraine is grinding on, or some would say, gathering pace. Frustrating international leaders trying to broker peace between Kyiv and Moscow. Negotiating for the day after seems easier, and that's what Ukraine's allies are doing in Paris, in the presence of the Ukrainian president.
We want legally binding security guarantees. We do not want another Budapest memorandum or Minsk agreement.
His biggest wish, a stated readiness by NATO member states to support Ukraine in the event of renewed Russian aggression. According to a report citing European Commission chief Ursula von der Leyen, this may well happen. In an interview with the Financial Times, she said Europe was drawing up, quote, pretty precise plans for a multinational troop deployment in post-war Ukraine, potentially consisting of tens of thousands of European-led boots on the ground. The United States apparently on board. The EU chief said Donald Trump had given repeated assurances at a meeting in August that there would be a US presence to support the Europeans. This is what Trump told the cameras.
There'll be a lot of help. When it comes to security, there's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe. But we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved.
It's really a breakthrough. And,
the same day, NATO chief Mark Rutte and Britain's Prime Minister claimed a breakthrough on security guarantees by Washington.
When your indication of security guarantees of some sort of Article 5 style guarantees fits with what we've been doing with the Coalition of the Willing, which we started some months ago, bringing countries together.
Article 5 like NATO protection for Ukraine. While we don't have specifics on what that could look like, it's language that likely triggers the Kremlin, like talk of sending multinational troops to Ukraine.
There is no European military. There are the militaries of specific countries, and most of these countries are NATO members.
And Moscow isn't the only party unhappy about the EU chief's comments in the Financial Times. Germany's defense minister stating, quote, "Those are things that you don't discuss before you sit down at the negotiating table with many parties that have a say in the matter." He added, "The European Union has no mandate or competency whatsoever when it comes to positioning troops."
The next steps ahead are the more complicated ones now.
Discussing security guarantees for post-war Ukraine may be easier than ending the war. But a diplomatic walk in the park, it isn't.
We can cross straight to Kyiv and speak to our correspondent there, Nimisha Jaiswal. Nimisha, the French president said yesterday that Europe is set to offer Ukraine security guarantees. Do we have any concrete details yet on what those guarantees might actually look like?
Well, we don't, Anya. Macron didn't offer any details, nor did UK Defence Minister John Healey, who was here speaking in Kyiv yesterday. He said that he didn't want to forewarn Moscow, but he reiterated that the security guarantees are real and substantial. When it comes to what Ukraine wants, in a rare, candid moment that Zelenskyy had at the Oval Office a few weeks ago, he said Ukraine wants everything. That includes offensive and defensive capabilities, intelligence, weapons, and defense in the air, on land, in the sea, and in cyberspace with US backstops. Now, of course, the reassurance force that we've been talking about is a divisive topic even amidst Europeans. And for the local people here in Kyiv, as well as bloggers here who are analyzing this war, they think they're skeptical about Europe going through with deploying a reassurance force when Moscow has repeatedly rejected this, including this morning.
Now, President Putin, Russia's President Putin, said he would be willing to meet President Zelenskyy if Zelenskyy visited Moscow. How seriously is that invitation being taken in Kyiv?
Well, it's being seen as ridiculous. It was floated once before as well, soon after the Alaska meeting, and Zelenskyy had already said no. And after yesterday's comments from Putin, Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha said that there are 7 countries that have offered to host these talks. All are acceptable to Ukraine. But once again, Putin is offering Moscow, knowing that he's just messing around and that this is knowingly unacceptable to Ukraine. There's also the tone of the way Putin said this. He once again referred to Zelenskyy as an acting leader, reiterating that he doesn't believe that he is a legitimate leader of Ukraine. He also said he would want this meeting only when all the details are ironed out. Another way of saying that he wants Zelenskyy to come up and capitulate. So none of this is seriously seen as acceptable, and Ukraine once again reiterating that the US needs to apply pressure on Putin to show up at that table.
And all the while, Russian attacks on Ukraine are intensifying. This meeting in Paris is happening against the backdrop of these Russian attacks on Ukraine. What does this escalation tell us about Moscow's current strategy and how it might affect the tone of today's talks in Paris?
Well, Anna, it's been a really rough week here in Ukraine. Last night, the concentration was on Odessa, on Sumy, on Zaporizhzhia. Last week, dozens of lives were lost here in Kyiv. There's been a targeting of energy infrastructure, hinting once again at the desire from Moscow to disable heating in Ukraine as we run up to the winter. And yesterday's comments, Putin once again said that if he didn't see common sense, in his words, being seen, that Russia would continue pushing ahead militarily. So there's a lot of skepticism here when it comes to Moscow's intentions to actually wrap up this war in any sense. And it is quite understandable because the Ukrainian government keeps reiterating the need for US pressure. Today, yet another deadline has passed that Trump had said 2 weeks or there will be repercussions for Russia. And when you talk to the Ukrainian government, of course, they keep appealing to partners. But when you talk to the people here, understandably, everybody I've spoken to in the last weeks has said, what peace, what deal, what backing down? They do not believe in Putin, and the continuous attacks they're experiencing explains why that is.
DW's Nimisha Jaiswal in Kyiv. Nimisha, thank you. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is in Paris for discussions on a post-war plan for Ukraine. Hosted by the French President Emmanuel Macron, leaders of Ukraine's allies are expected to discuss how to deter Russia from attacking again once a peace deal has been agreed. One proposal is the idea of sending European ground troops to support the Ukrainian army. That's something that Germany opposes and which Russia rejects as unacceptable. Steve Witkoff, US President Donald Trump's special envoy, is also at the meeting. And DW correspondent Teri Schultz is in Paris for us. Teri, what are the security guarantees being discussed here in Paris? And also, how likely is it that they'll hold after any potential ceasefire in Ukraine?
Well, Anya, I think there's a lot more concern now about ever getting to a ceasefire, much less what would happen after that. And all of the security guarantees being discussed here, and President Macron says he believes that they actually could be finalized at this meeting. All of them depend on there being peace on the ground, some kind of agreement between Russia and Ukraine that would lay out where Russian troops would be, where they can't be. And that is really what these depend on. Now, what those look like for now, having not been published yet, but from all the discussions that we've been having, is that the first thing that they're promising Ukraine is that the Ukrainian armed forces will be regenerated. They say that they will have training from the Europeans and other countries, that they will have the best equipment that could be provided, because that is Ukraine's best security guarantee, being able to defend itself. Now, they also are, as you say, talking about eventually putting troops on the ground. A couple of countries have already said they'll do that, the UK and France. Others are talking about it, depending on what that peace deal might look like and what kind of backstops they would have from the Americans. That's another real big uncertainty here. What are the Americans actually going to promise, having said that they will provide some kind of backup for these European forces?
Speaking of the Americans, Teri, the US diplomat Steve Witkoff is at this meeting. What signal is the US sending by having him join?
Yeah, I think that must be a real reassuring signal for the Europeans, because I don't think we were in outside the meeting that Witkoff would be here, and they have not joined coalition meetings in the past. It has only been some 30 other countries, European countries, NATO allies, Australia. So having the U.S. here does make it seem like discussions are at a more advanced stage for what backstop the U.S. is willing to provide. Now, I understand that Mr. Witkoff was in the meeting this morning, addressed the participants, and left. He is expected to come back because they're going to be speaking with President Trump when they wrap up this portion of the meeting.
And just briefly, Teri, we are hearing that President Putin says he's willing to meet President Zelenskyy in Moscow. How's this being received by Ukraine and by Ukraine's European allies?
I don't think any of Ukraine's allies would expect President Zelenskyy to go to Moscow. In fact, there have been half a dozen other countries that have offered themselves as potential hosts for peace talks. And I saw the Ukrainian foreign minister writing about that this morning on X. Again, I think it's not realistic to think that President Zelenskyy would travel to Moscow. I don't think anyone here would even suggest that for him.
DW's Teri Schultz reporting from Paris. Teri, thank you so much.